Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, November 8th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about Donald Trump's election night this past Tuesday. The United States elections that we saw across Virginia, New Jersey, New York City, California, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and so on and so forth showed us a tremendous result, and not one in favor of the Republican Party, as Democrats cleared the Republicans in every single competitive race that took place last Tuesday. And as we saw, the voters turned out resoundingly against the President of the United States and Republican nominees in everything from local and statewide elections to high-level propositions that have national implications almost immediately upon taking effect. And for a while, we've seen that the President of the United States is the master of spinning news in favor of his political party. Whether it's an initiative that comes out of the White House that's botched, whether it is an election result that shows that Donald Trump's endorsements did not hold the weight he believes it did, he has always found himself of the opinion that the election results that have been conducted either under his elections, when he was president the first time, some of the specials that have taken place this second time, no matter what it was, the president has very rarely admitted that the election results are bad for the Republican Party. But that's exactly what he just did. In acknowledgement that the Republicans did pretty badly, he immediately turned to distancing himself against the Republicans who lost their races there. The first thing he told Fox News in the transcript here, it was a result, an interview done with Brett Baier just a day after the election. The first thing that they talked about was this election. He essentially said that he never endorsed Winsome Sears, and he never did so because he didn't think she was going to win. And it seems as if Donald Trump, in acknowledging that Republicans have not done well this past cycle, really shows just how badly the Republicans lost. There was not a single thing that the president could cling on to say that this was our silver lining. Oftentimes, if he's been met with adversity, whether it's losing a race in Alabama, like the Senate race in 2017, to which Donald Trump tried to reject responsibility and tried to find a way to spin it, saying there were external factors, X, Y, and Z. And while he will always, and he does so in the interview, deflect blame and responsibility, because no doubt about it, a president who's underwater 15 points nationwide is certainly not ushering his political party to victory in the country. But at the same time, in this acknowledging of it, it really shows just how damning the election results were, that a president who oftentimes will not admit the obvious, that Republicans that they did poorly and that they, lost a lot of support considerably compared to the last cycle. It is mental gymnastics on the side of Donald Trump and his closest allies when they are looking at ways to explain electoral defeats. This time, they own up to it. And I think they do so because, again, they can't point not just to a single one of these high-level races, but even some of the states like Pennsylvania and Georgia that had Democrat versus Republican elections on the ballot, to which the Democrats won those elections not just by a little, but in some cases by deafening margins. In Georgia, the public service commissioner races that Republicans had held one of the races since 2011, the other one for over a decade. With these incumbents in particular who have been running in these statewide elections for quite some time, in this election, the Democrats didn't just flip the seats, they did so by 25 points. And so seeing just how it's all been cut across the country, there's no doubt in my mind that the president realizes that his agenda is unpopular and that Republicans, not Democrats, are the ones suffering at the ballot box. We start off by looking at New York City's mayoral race, where Donald Trump did a last-minute endorsement of Andrew Cuomo in the race there. Did not make a difference. Even with the disaffected Democratic support, Andrew Cuomo still came up short of winning the mayoral election despite having the MAGA backing. And, a sizable portion of the Democratic electorate also voting for Andrew Cuomo in this race. Zohran Mamdani very clearly does well in New York City and won his race with the majority of the vote, meaning that even if the Republicans and the independent candidate, Andrew Cuomo, had aligned and combined forces, it wouldn't have made a difference. Mamdani would still be mayor. But even in states like California, where you saw that it wasn't a multi-way race, it's a yes or no question, but yes outran Kamala Harris in this state by about 9 points and growing. That the margin here is so substantive that it outflanks even Biden's 2020 margin, which was the largest we've seen for Democrats in quite some time in the state of California. And it just shows that the Democrats were inspired and enthusiastic, enough so that they were turning out in an off year in a ballot referendum. And what it does, and this is the race I was talking about with immediate national implications. What California's Proposition 50 suggested is that when it comes down to the 2024 House races, that they seek to eliminate 5 of the Republican seats in this state. And the new map would look a lot closer to this across the board, with a much bluer California and Republicans being reduced down to just 4 seats in terms of total representation. Wow. And so when you think about, the results here and what it actually means, what it is telling us is that Donald Trump, obviously, and the Republican Party in an alignment, lost resoundingly. But the fact the president is willing to admit it, I think, again, goes to show that there is no way to spin this. Losing in Virginia, in a state that Kamala Harris only won by 5, winning this state on the Democratic side by 15, the Attorney General's race, where Jay Jones had what normally would have been a career-ending scandal come about right before the election, a month out from voting being fully conducted and over, and yet he outperformed Kamala Harris. In New Jersey's governor race, Mikey Sherrill also outperforming Kamala Harris, but on track to be roughly identical in margin to what the results were in 2017 that would foretell the 2018 landslide election for the Democrats and the eventual departure of Donald Trump from the White House after his first term in 2020. And so what we found was that this margin here for the Democrats was so bad that even Donald Trump is willing to admit it. And now he's going on this tour around Republicans saying, you didn't talk about affordability enough. You should have learned from me. You should have embraced my policies more. It seems as if there is this cognitive dissonance with the president of the United States in understanding why the Republicans actually lost. It's not because Republicans, who, yes, were blindsided by an economy that rages on and ravages on across the country in a way that is very negative for the American public. Donald Trump promised on day one he'd fix it all, and now everything is more expensive than when he first took office. And that's why, he says, well, you didn't talk about affordability. I'm going to No, a lot of it is economic policy that starts directly at the top. And if Republicans were to acknowledge the state of the American economy, it would only exemplify the fears of many of these voters who blame Donald Trump and the GOP, who control the White House, control the Supreme Court, control the U.S. House, control the U.S. Senate. I mean, everywhere you look, it's GOP, 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 GOP. You can't find a reason to try to pivot and blame the opposition party because at the end of the day, voters aren't stupid. They know that Donald Trump is to blame around the government shutdown. They know that he is to blame for affordability because these are all things that even if it wasn't possible to be done in a day, which anyone who knows anything knows that that's not the case, but why campaign on it? Why make this a center focus of your election if you knew it couldn't be done? Evidently, they knew, and now are facing the real repercussions of what that means electorally. But I don't believe it for a second that Donald Trump should be disconnected from the main reason as to why Republicans are losing extraordinary elections by massive margins. High-profile races that their side of the aisle spent tens of millions of dollars in only to run up short of Democrats tripling Kamala Harris's margin in Virginia and tripling Kamala Harris's margin in doubling Kamala Harris's margin in New Jersey. Because that is what the elections showed. And it was a complete and total rejection of the president of the United States, enough so that he is willing to admit it for the first time in a very long time, that his political party might have more things to fear. Because that's why Donald Trump has been making this ploy across the country to change the maps and change the math of the 2026 midterms. That's why in Texas, the Democratic number has been resorted from 13 down to 8. Why in Missouri, it's gone from 2 to 1. Why in North Carolina, it's gone from 4 to 3. The Republicans know that the only way they have any chance at salvaging and maintaining their current and present-day control of the House is by gerrymandering the hell out of many of these states that they have control to do so. And if done correctly, could mitigate a lot of the losses that they expect to see in 2026. But something I don't think the Republicans expected was this newfound energy on the Democratic side to be willing to fight back. History tells us that when Republicans decided in 2010 to embark on this journey of taking all of these maps and drawing them in a way that was so consequentially strong for the GOP, many of these states that historically just 4 years prior had dominant Democratic representation. So much blue turned into so much red, and it was the stroke of a pen of a Republican governor and the drawing of a map with the Republican state legislature that solidified the Democratic Party's continued loss in many of these states, like North Carolina, that in an election just 4 years prior had a majority of Democrats in office there, but also, too, they had been winning across the state. Barack Obama won North Carolina in that election, and yet 4 years later, these maps are drawn to be some of the most egregious we have seen across the nation. And so in seeing, I want to see what happened in 2014 on that race. Wow, look at that. That election that was, slightly for the Democrats. I guess the Democrat chose to retire ahead of 14 because Republicans won it by 22. But again, getting back to this point of exactly what happened here in 2012, well, the result is clear. Republicans overwhelmingly gerrymandered. But states like California still had roughly 1 out of 4 representatives coming from the Republican Party. That wasn't great for the Democrats. A state like New York, we saw continuously and at different periods of time, had far more sizable portions of Republican representation and to some degree by massive, massive amounts, even if that was not what was necessarily as fair. In 2012, Republicans won 12 seats in Ohio, and a state that Barack Obama won on the presidential level. I mean, I kid you not, the Republicans were the party that had historically done so much damage to the Democrats, gerrymandering-wise. And Democrats, out of this name and faith of acting and taking the moral high ground, would consistently lose the elections that even in 2018, sure, a damn good victory for the Democratic Party. But they had to win the national popular vote by roughly 9 points. And so if that was to be, for example, if we were to take a Democratic victory of 9 points in the 2024 election, this is what the map would look like. You would be seeing Democrats, who lost the popular vote by roughly 3 points. The map would look like this, far more blue than what the 2018 map showed. And that's because Democrats now are willing to do what Republicans have felt they were the only side of the aisle willing to go for blood. The only side of the aisle willing to change the maps and make all these different things left, right, and center. And a big reason why Democrats have this enthusiasm and energy to do it isn't because something just switched. It's because the president of the United States reached record low favorability ratings, and Democrats are looking for a real reason and a real way to push back against him than what happened in the first term. Rather than countless protests and strongly worded letters and procedural votes, they turned it into tangible election results, and Donald Trump is feeling the heat. His administration knows what it means when California overturns what they did in Texas. His administration knows and feels it in Virginia when Republicans held control of the Attorney General's office, Lieutenant Governor's office, and the Governor's office and lost all 3 in one fell swoop. In a state like New Jersey, where Jack Ciattarelli embraced the endorsement of Donald Trump, ultimately losing this race by even more, it begs the question, why? And it seems that there's one common denominator. Whether it is the endorsement and kiss of death of Donald Trump in the state of New Jersey, or the proximity to Washington, D.C. in the state of Virginia, or the scapegoat that Mamdani and Newsom put on Trump, not scapegoat, but boogeyman and common enemy for voters in the state and nation's largest city, the one common denominator is the president who acknowledges that the election results were not good for the GOP. But it doesn't seem he's learned his lesson. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We'll talk about that a little bit closer to the end of the video. Or sorry, today or tomorrow. We'll see when we actually talk about it. But the point is that as it stands right now, the results are clear. And if Donald Trump himself is willing to admit it, I think that means and moves arguably mountains. No more mental gymnastics around what this race did. Obviously, his reasoning is far off from reality. But in acknowledging that the Republican Party failed to capture in sentiment and support, I think we've reached a point where the Democrats are going to be recognizing that this is the blueprint to move forward, and Donald Trump's acknowledgement of it all only really does reaffirm that. And so we will find that over the coming weeks and over the coming months, there will be more analysis, more of an autopsy as to what went wrong for Republicans on Election Day. But as it stands today, the results are clear, and the president is willing to admit it for the first time since his time in electoral politics that Republicans really did poorly. And looking at some of these results, it's very hard to disagree. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 26 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.